Have you ever felt guilty for resting, saying no, or putting yourself first? You might think that's just who you are. But what if those behaviors have been quietly been driven by a belief you accepted long before you were old enough to question it? Welcome back to Breakthrough Weekly. I'm your host, Monica Pelayo. Every week, we go beneath the surface of what's keeping you stuck, not to the symptoms, but to where it actually started. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, thank you for being back. Today's episode is titled The Hidden Cost of Proving Your Worth. Let's begin. The subconscious mind drives much of our daily behavior. The patterns and habits we repeat become automatic, operating outside of our conscious awareness. Because they've become familiar, we rarely stop to question them. Looking back at my 21-year corporate career, I realized that my dedication was being shaped by a subconscious pattern that had quietly influenced the way I worked, thought, and responded for years. I took great pride in my work ethic. I became part of my identity, and I genuinely believed being the person who always showed up, always found a way, and always went above and beyond was simply who I was. For years, I never questioned any of it. I simply believed those behaviors reflected a strong work ethic. Have you ever found yourself postponing taking a vacation because work was always too busy? Or working through an illness because taking time off somehow felt harder than pushing through? Or feeling guilty resting even when no one expected you to be working? That was my reality for years. I showed up, worked hard, excelled in my role, and made myself available whenever needed. I believed I was committed, dependable, and doing what any good employee would do. It never occurred to me to question any of it because it all felt completely normal. At the time, I had no reason to question any of it. Those behaviors had become so familiar that they simply felt like a part of who I was. It would take years and a completely different perspective before I realized there was something much deeper driving them. It wasn't until years later, after becoming certified in hypnosis and rapid transformational therapy, working on myself throughout my certification and spending time reflecting on my own life, that I began seeing those experiences differently. For years, I had a reasonable explanation for every decision I made. Every explanation made sense. Every explanation was true, but each one only explained the circumstances. The pattern underneath all of them, the thing actually explaining why I responded the way I did, remained invisible. Three moments stand out. While I was on vacation in Cancun with my family, I received a call from work late that night. The request was important, but it wasn't truly urgent. I didn't have my laptop with me, so I remember sitting in my hotel room, scrolling through the emails on my phone, trying to piece together an answer from memory because I genuinely wanted to help. For years, I made myself available whenever someone needed me. I rarely said no. Being available had become so automatic that I never stopped to question it. When my phone rang during my vacation, they weren't calling someone who had a reputation for protecting her personal time. They were calling the Monica they had always known, the one who always responded quickly, made herself available at all times, and found a way to help. People weren't asking more of me. They were responding to the standard I already set. That realization was difficult because it shifted my perspective. The question was no longer, why would they call me on vacation? The better question became, why did I constantly feel responsible for prioritizing work over my personal life? At that time, I didn't think much of it. I simply moved on. It would be years before I realized that what happened that night reflected a much deeper pattern. Years later, I began supporting a corporate vice president, and from the beginning, our working relationship felt different. One of our first conversations was about expectations. I let him know that during working hours from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m., I was available. If something truly required my attention after hours, he could call or text me. Otherwise, I would respond the next business day. Having that conversation gave us both clear expectations, and it gave me a peace of mind. I knew what was expected, I knew what was urgent, I knew what could wait. But even with those clear expectations, I still found myself monitoring emails late at night and responding to them. One day, during one of our conversations about it, he shared something that completely changed the way I interpreted his emails. He said, "Sometimes I'm sending you an email because I'm trying to get a task off my mind. I'm not expecting you to respond right away. I just don't want to forget to tell you." His explanation made perfect sense. Sending the email wasn't a request for immediate action, it was a mental check mark. He trusted that I'd take care of it. That conversation made me realize we had been operating from two completely different assumptions. For him, sending the email meant Monica has it now. For me, receiving the email meant I need to respond immediately. Quick turnaround had become a part of who I measured my own performance. If I saw an email, I wanted to acknowledge it. If there was something I could complete immediately, I wanted it done so I wouldn't have to worry about dropping the ball later. I genuinely believed I was providing exceptional support, and in many ways, I was. Some of the urgency I felt wasn't coming from him, it was coming from me. Even with healthy boundaries clearly established and expectations openly communicated, I was still carrying the same internal pressure I've been living with for years. At the time, I thought I simply found a leader who communicated exceptionally well, had clear boundaries, and prioritized his life outside of work. And he did. Today, I understand that those things were all true. Healthy boundaries mattered. They gave me clarity, trust, and realistic expectations. What they couldn't change was the subconscious pattern I had been operating from for years. I still found myself overworking, going above and beyond, and placing that same pressure on myself. The experience that stayed with me the most happened years later while I was working in Intel's CEO office. At the time, I didn't think there was anything unusual about it. Today, as a hypnotherapist, I see that experience very differently. It tells me more about how I was operating than the situation itself. After covering for the CEO's executive assistant during her extended time away, which required taking on an even heavier workload than usual, I gave myself a few well deserved days off to recharge. When I flew back home, I started feeling sick. It turned out I contracted COVID. Because I have a compromised immune system, it hit me hard. Every day seemed worse than the one before. I called my doctor's office almost every day, desperate to feel better, asking what else I could do, what else I could take. It wasn't until several days later that another provider finally prescribed what was commonly referred to at the time as emergency pill, which immediately started turning things around. I remember thinking how close I came to missing the treatment window altogether. At the time, Intel's policy was that employees who tested positive for COVID received 10 paid working days to recover, 10 full workdays. I had every one of them available to me. I chose to work instead. Not because anyone expected me to. My manager encouraged me to rest. My coworkers encouraged me to rest. Everyone understood I was sick. The decision came entirely from me. If you had asked me then why I wasn't taking the time off, my answer would have sounded completely reasonable. The CEO office was already operating at full capacity. We just transitioned responsibilities back after I had spent an extended period covering for the CEO's executive assistant. I couldn't imagine asking my team to adjust yet again because I'd gotten sick. To me, I was simply being responsible. So I found what felt like a reasonable compromise. An 8-hour workday was rare for me to begin with, but that was all my body could physically manage. I work for 4 hours, sleep for two, then work another 4 hours. That became my routine while I was recovering. The first week was miserable. What I remember just as vividly, though, was how incredibly kind everyone around me was. My workers checked on me constantly. One of my coworkers sent me a wellness care package filled with soup, fruit, tea, vitamins, and other things they hoped would help me recover. The soup became one of the only things I had enough energy to eat during those first 2 days. I had no energy to cook, and with my sore throat, warm soup was the only few things that brought any comfort. That care package meant far more than they probably realized. At a time when I could barely take care of myself, their kindness reminded me I didn't have to go through it alone. Everyone around me was trying to help me heal. Everyone was giving me permission to slow down. The only person who wouldn't give herself that same permission was me. At that time, I never stopped to question that decision. Working while I recovered felt completely normal. It felt responsible. It felt like anyone in my position would do. What strikes me the most is the double standard I was living by. If I had known one of my own coworkers being sick, I would have told them take the time off, rest, and let us take care of everything else. I would have reminded them that their health came first. Somehow, I couldn't extend that same compassion to myself. The question of why it felt so difficult to receive the same care and grace I so freely gave everyone else never crossed my mind. That question didn't arrive until years later. Once I became certified in hypnosis and rapid transformational therapy, I didn't enroll because I planned to become a hypnotherapist. I enrolled because I wanted to understand myself. For years, I've been living with questions I couldn't answer. Why did I feel so responsible for everyone else? Why was resting so uncomfortable? Why did saying no feel so much harder than saying yes? Why did I keep repeating certain behaviors even when I knew they were costing me? As part of my certification program, we were required to practice with one another. For me, each session became another opportunity to better understand my own mind. Having someone else guide me the session and ask questions I never would have thought to ask myself led to insights I couldn't have reached on my own. During that process, I uncovered my own rooted belief. Understanding it became a key piece of the puzzle. As I began understanding my own rooted belief and recognizing how it had been influencing different areas of my life, I naturally started looking at my own experiences the same way I was learning to look at my clients. I stopped viewing each situation as an isolated event and started looking for patterns in how I responded, the emotions I experienced, and the meanings I attached to seemingly unrelated situations. That's when everything started connecting. For years, I looked at each experience individually. Cancun was about communication. My corporate vice president had modeled healthy boundaries. Choosing to work through COVID was about supporting my team. Every explanation made sense. Every explanation was true, but each one only explained the situation. None of them explained why I kept responding the same way. When I placed those experiences side by side, I started focusing on what they all had in common. The same emotions kept showing up, the same interpretations, the same discomfort whenever I thought about disappointing someone, the same guilt whenever I put myself first, the same need to be dependable, the same tendency to make myself available, even when it came at my own expense. Each experience felt completely normal and reasonable on its own. Together, they revealed a pattern I couldn't see when I looked at them individually. Then something else became impossible to ignore. Once I recognized that pattern at work, I started seeing it everywhere else in my relationships, in the way I gave to others, and how difficult it was to ask for help, and the guilt I felt whenever I prioritized myself. Different environments, different people, different situations, the same emotional responses repeating underneath. Once I understood how the subconscious mind works, it all made sense. Those patterns hadn't started at work. Work was simply where I finally recognized them. The subconscious mind doesn't separate our lives into different categories. The beliefs we develop early on quietly shape how we show up in our careers, our relationships, our families, our friendships, and every other area of our lives. That's when my focus shifted. The question was no longer why I kept doing these things. It became what belief could explain every one of these experiences. That's the same question I now help uncover with my clients every day. Throughout my RTT work, one belief kept surfacing: I wasn't enough. For much of my life, I've carried that belief without realizing it. It hadn't begun in my career, it had been forming since childhood. As a little girl, I interpreted my father's inability to love me the way I needed as evidence that I didn't matter and that no matter what I did, it would never be enough to be fully loved. It wasn't the only experience that shaped that belief, but it became one of the moments that reinforced and confirmed what my young mind had already begun to believe. From that point on, my subconscious mind did exactly what it was designed to do. It filtered my experiences through the belief that I wasn't enough, drawing my attention to anything that seemed to confirm it while overlooking the countless moments that contradicted it. Without realizing, I spent years trying to prove my worth. I worked harder, gave more, and made myself constantly available, hoping that if I could become indispensable, I would finally feel enough. If people depended on me, I mattered. If I became indispensable, I felt safe. I could finally see how that belief quietly shaped the way I saw myself. For years, I proudly called myself a workaholic. I wore it like a badge of honor because I believed it reflected dedication, commitment, and being someone others could count on. What I didn't realize was that I built an identity around proving my worth. I saw myself as the person who always showed up, always found a way, and always was available. Once that identity took hold, my behaviors naturally aligned with it. Working through illness, making myself constantly available, feeling guilty for taking time off, saying yes when I wanted to say no, trying to solve every problem, and overextending myself before asking someone else for help. For the first time, I understood that those behaviors weren't simply a part of who I was. They were coping strategies my subconscious mind developed in response to a belief it had accepted as true. Suddenly, 21 years of my life made sense. Not just my career, my relationships, the guilt, the overgiving, the pressure. It was all connected. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is believing that once they uncover their rooted belief, everything will automatically change. It doesn't. Once I became aware of the pattern, I finally knew what to look for. For the first time, I could recognize it while it was happening instead of only seeing it years later. Whether it was saying yes when I wanted to say no, feeling guilty when I rested, or immediately taking responsibility for someone else's problem, I could pause and ask myself a different question. Is this what I genuinely want to do, or is this my old pattern responding because it's familiar? That awareness gave me something I'd never had before: choice. Making different choices, however, didn't mean the old patterns disappeared overnight. The subconscious mind primary's job is survival. One of the ways it protects us is by constantly asking one question: is this familiar? If the answer is yes, it accepts the behavior because it's already learned it's safe. If the answer is no, it creates resistance because the unfamiliar is perceived as a potential threat. That's why setting healthier boundaries, saying no without guilt, or allowing ourselves to receive support instead of always giving it can feel so uncomfortable at first. Not because those choices are wrong, but because they're different from what the subconscious has learned to recognize as safe. I found myself slipping in old patterns from time to time. The difference was that I no longer judged myself for it. Instead of criticizing myself, I became curious. Every moment of awareness became another opportunity to choose differently. Over time, those new choices became easier, not because the old programming disappeared overnight, but because I was intentionally teaching my mind that a healthier response could become familiar too. That's why I care so deeply about supporting my clients beyond helping them uncover the rooted belief. Discovering the belief is only one part of the journey. Real change happens as they learn to navigate the resistance, apply new responses consistently, and gradually teach their subconscious that those healthier patterns are safe and familiar. Having the right support through the process can make all the difference. I don't regret working hard. I don't regret caring deeply about the people I supported. I don't regret striving for excellence or wanting to make a meaningful impact. Those qualities are still part of who I am today. My work ethic didn't disappear. My dedication didn't disappear. My desire to help others didn't disappear. What changed wasn't the behaviors themselves, it was the belief driving them and the meaning I had attached to their outcome. For years, I believed my value had to be earned, that I needed to prove I was indispensable, that being needed was what made me matter. Today, I understand something very different. My value doesn't increase because I'm constantly available. It doesn't disappear because I take time to rest. It doesn't depend on how quickly I respond to an email, how much I sacrifice, or how difficult I be to replace. My value isn't something I earn, it's my birthright. That realization changed far more than the way I worked. It changed how I showed up in my relationships, how I cared for myself, how I allowed other people to care for me, how I measured my own worth. I now realize the greatest cost was never the long hours, the missed vacations, or working through COVID. Those were the visible consequences. The greatest cost was spending years trying to prove something that never needed proving in the first place. I didn't begin this journey because I wanted to become a hypnotherapist. I began because I wanted to understand myself. The more I understood my own subconscious patterns, the more I realized how much pain, self doubt, and unnecessary struggle I could have saved myself if I've understood them sooner. That's when helping others stopped being an interest and became my purpose. Today, most people don't come to me because they think they have a limiting belief. They come because they're exhausted by a pattern they can't seem to change. They've read the books, they made the promises to themselves, they know what they should do, yet somehow they keep finding themselves back in the same place. I understand that feeling, I lived it, and I've also experienced what can happen when you finally understand the belief that's been quietly driving those patterns all along and change it. Sometimes the greatest breakthrough isn't learning something new, sometimes it's finally understanding yourself. If you've recognized yourself anywhere in my story, I invite you to get curious. Have you noticed the guilt around resting? the pressure to always be available, the feeling that you have to prove your worth, or patterns you've been repeating without fully understanding why. Not because something is wrong with you, but because your behaviors are often telling a story your conscious mind isn't aware of. I offer a complimentary exploratory call where we discuss the challenges you're experiencing, what you would like your life to look like instead, and determine whether hypnosis using RTT methods is the right fit for your goals. Whether you're the right fit or not, you'll leave the conversation with greater clarity about the patterns you like to change and the future you like to create. Schedule your complimentary exploratory call at www.thethrivingpathways.com/appointment. If something in this episode felt familiar, not just as a story, but as a pattern you recognize in your own life, that recognition matters. The subconscious doesn't surface what isn't ready to be seen. If it came up, it's worth paying attention to. Thank you for spending this time with me. If someone came to mind while you were listening, that's not a coincidence. Send this episode to them. New episodes drop every Monday. Subscribe so you don't miss next week's Breakthrough Weekly. I'm Monica Pelayo. I'll see you next time.